What do Star Wars and The Wizard of Oz have in common? Well, not really anything except for being the basis of one of the most genius archetypes in Yu-Gi-Oh! This is the story of the Kozmo archetype, a bizarre, unexpected fusion of two completely different worlds that somehow became one of the coolest and a very good deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! So one thing I honestly love the most about Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that every deck now, at least, is so unique and different, especially when it comes to the visual concept and inspiration. Rather than acquiring an existing license of some IP, they're able to utilize things in the public domain as well as concepts that are constantly parodied. So that is where we get the Kozmo archetype, a combination of Star Wars and Wizard of Oz, at least in terms of the inspiration, very legally distinct as Kozmo. And even then, the name is actually pretty genius. Sure, it is just the word Kozmo, relating to space, but even having the OZ in there is a fun little way to reference the world of Oz. Released in Clash of Rebellion in 2015, this was a TCG exclusive archetype that really made waves when it first came out. Also, given the fact that this was a year Star Wars was returning to theaters with The Force Awakens, it kind of added a little more excitement. Regardless of your opinion on those films, especially the last one, I think we can at least agree that the promise of a potential brighter future was at least exciting. Anyway, being TCG exclusive cards, that meaning they debuted in the North American and English markets, making it to the Japanese OCG eventually, blending two very iconic stories from America was a genius idea. And while the deck did perform really well once it got a lot more support, I genuinely think that the concept and the artwork are the best part about them. So at least in terms of gameplay, the way that Kozmo works is really fun, because half of the archetype is made up of lower level psychic monsters, these are the pilots, and then the other half are a bunch of higher level machine type monsters, these being the ships that they would pilot. All of the low level monsters can special summon a higher level Kozmo card from the hand, and then when the higher level cards are destroyed, you can banish them in order to special summon a smaller Kozmo monster. So effectively, this is the pilot jumping into a ship and flying it around to attack, and then when the ship is destroyed, they basically eject out safely. But like I said, the thing that is really fun is just seeing the different inspirations of both Wizard of Oz and Star Wars. So let's start off with those pilots. First up, the core of the archetype is Kozmo Farmgirl, obviously being a combination of Dorothy and Luke. She's even on a desert planet that has two suns that is very obviously meant to be Tatooine, and then she has a robotic dog behind her that meant to be Toto. Toto does not exist as its own monster, rather appearing only in the artwork of various cards. I'm not sure we'll ever get Toto printed, but it would be a fun idea. Then we've got Kozmo Good Witch, a combination between Glinda the Good Witch and Obi-Wan Kenobi, with also potentially a bit of Yoda in there with how the lightsaber is green and how the skin is green. But after that, I do want to move on to the villains at least, because the first dark type pilot we got was Kozmo Wicked Witch. At first we thought that this was sorta meant to be the Wicked Witch of the West, but with later releases we would find out that this is actually the Wicked Witch of the East. I think it's also a fun idea with how the legs look and how they're kinda wrapped up. It's a reference to the original movie and how the legs look there. But aside from just being the Wicked Witch of the East, this is also Darth Maul, with how the laser sword has two blades, and then also the name is Kozmol instead of Kozmo. But then you could also say maybe it's a little bit of a mix of the Emperor as well, because of the other Kozmo that we eventually got, which was Kozmo Dark Lady. Very obviously meant to be the Wicked Witch of the West and Darth Vader, two very iconic movie villains coming together to be actually one of the better cards in the deck. After that, let's go ahead and bring up the iconic trio that Dorothy eventually meets, with Kozmo Tin Can being a combination of R2-D2 and the Tin Man, Kozmo Strawman being a combination of the Scarecrow and C-3PO, with Kozmo Scaredy Lion being a combination of Chewbacca and the Cowardly Lion. Also, the artwork is really funny here, actually having another appearance of Toto, who we do also see in Kozmo Strawman as well as a leg of Farmgirl, and then Tin Can also has a bit of Strawman there, and we get a closer look at the ship that they crash landed on. So now we're kind of starting to see the story beats of Star Wars come together. Though the last pilot of the deck is obviously going to be Kozmo Sword Troopers, a combination of Stormtroopers and the Flying Monkeys, which again just another little genius connection of all the little extra baddies that we see in both movies. But it is also really cool that they have this dark armor, which does fit how the monkeys are usually depicted, but also is a neat way of making it look like the Shadow Troopers that we've seen in Star Wars before. And while we do have a pretty good lineup of pilots, and it does hit every beat in the Wizard of Oz, we are actually missing two important characters of the original Star Wars trilogy, those being Princess Leia and Han Solo, who I really do hope to see adapted someday if we do get some additional Kozmo support, though I'm really wondering who they could be of the Wizard of Oz. At that point, I feel like you'd have to dive a lot deeper into the novels. But moving on to the ships, I don't want to say that they're less interesting, but generally they do only take inspiration from Star Wars, aside from a few. Kozmo Sliprider is obviously meant to be an X-Wing, we also see Kozmo Farmgirl inside it. Kozmo Forerunner is meant to look like the Millennium Falcon, which does beg the question of who's actually flying it if there's no Han Solo. I don't know, maybe it's Scaredy Lion, or maybe this is meant to be the Good Witch. But also pretty interesting that in terms of the ships, we only see two of the good guys. The rest of the ships are all the bad guys. Kozmo Delta Shuttle is basically just an upside down version of the Imperial Shuttle. Kozmo Dogfighter is meant to be the TIE Fighter, that's why there are so many of them, and why the word dog is all capitalized in the name. Kozmo Landwalker is actually the only land-based vehicle we see, and is meant to look like the AT-AT. Maybe also taking a bit more inspiration from the world of Oz. There's a spider in one of the books, I think, but also it's very interesting that in the artwork we see a bunch of the sword troopers on the ground, and the setting of this battle is a desert planet. I guess that's one way to make it look legally distinct from the AT-ATs walking on Hoth, the ice planet, but I do also wonder if this is meant to be Kozmo Farmgirl's homeworld. Then to round out the ships, we have all of the big baddies, with Kozmo Dark Destroyer meant to look like Darth Maul's ship, but also we can talk about for a moment that this card was basically just like the star of a deck. This one just had the perfect combination of ease of summon ability, high attack points, and a destruction effect, as well as the fact that it just replaces itself when it's destroyed. But anyway, the second to last is Kozmo Dark Eclipser, meant to be a Star Destroyer, and then finally the last card at a hefty 4,000 attack and defense is Kozmo Dark Planet, which is a combination of the Death Star and the Witch's Castle. This is meant to be the big boss monster of a deck, but it is a bit more gimmicky than some of the others, but I really do just love the idea. Those are the perfect stats for a Death Star. Then to round things out in the spell and trap cards, we have Kozmo Town the Field spell, which allows you to recycle cards, and the artwork depicts a futuristic version of the Emerald City, potentially taking inspiration from like either Cloud City or maybe Coruscant. But now moving on to the final spell card, which is an equip spell, we have Kozmo Light Sword. But genuinely, the thing I love most about this artwork is that it doesn't just show the weapon and says, oh, you know, here's the artwork for the weapon card. It depicts a battle between Farmgirl and Good Witch and Wicked Witch, sort of being like the Duel of the Fates that we saw in episode 1, The Phantom Menace, really further driving in the Darth Maul inspiration. Then for the final two trap cards, we first have Kozmojo, depicting Farmgirl being force choked by a mysterious hand that we would eventually find out is Dark Lady, and I guess Kozmojo is basically what we would call the Force in this universe. Kinda neat that we get to see it here, but basically this is the only place we do see it, as in Farmgirl is never really shown using any sort of Kozmojo. But now the final trap card, Cosmorning, has some really interesting artwork, as it shows the aftermath of the final battle where Wicked Witch is dead, maybe, with Farmgirl and Good Witch lamenting over her death, possibly after finding out who she actually was underneath the mask. The sad thing is though, we don't really have another spell depicting their actual fight and we just see the aftermath of it, but like, oh my gosh, Dark Lady is actually just gorgeous, dang. And really I think the artwork itself is one of the things that makes this deck so memorable. Again, just the way that so many cards present an actual scene and many characters inside of it, giving us sort of the implication of a story relying on our familiarity with the source material. There is also the fact that it's not necessarily like a full anime style, with these being TCG debut cards that actually benefits the artwork, and it does also sort of give it this classic campy sci-fi feeling. Even though I said that it felt like this deck came out at the perfect time back in 2015, I really would have loved to see the kind of treatment it would get if it were released a little more recently, just because of the way that Yu-Gi-Oh itself has really upped its presentation when they're revealing new TCG debut cards, and also because of a lot of the fan reactions that we get around individual cards. Nowadays there is so much fan art drawn of basically every monster that gets revealed, and even after a deck is past its prime, there are so many dedicated fans. I guess what I'm really saying is that the concept of the Kozmo monsters was way ahead of its time, and now just might be the perfect year to give us even more support. Maybe not some new stuff that makes it absolutely busted, especially since we have a new Fire Kings around, but you know, just enough to at least remind everybody that they still exist and finish things up by giving us Han and Leia. So let me know what you think in the comments below about the Kozmo archetype. Which monster is your favorite? Did you ever play them when they came out, or have you played them online? Me personally, I never actually got to play them in real life because I was like a kid and they were really expensive. So maybe now with it being Star Wars month and me being really excited for Yu-Gi-Oh, it's the perfect time to take it on Master Duel Ladder. If you enjoyed watching, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and hype up the video, and let me know what cards and monsters you want to hear me talk about next. Anyway, this is GatorEX, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you all later.